Across all forms of media right now, people are asking the same question in different ways, and that is, are we heading for a war? And is this like a conventional state-on-state war with the likes of Russia, or something far worse, a breakdown from within? I want to say this clearly, calmly, and without hysteria. The United Kingdom, in my opinion, cannot fight a major war today. Not because we lack weapons or allies, but because we lack something far more fundamental, and that is cohesion. Let's start with an uncomfortable truth. The British Armed Forces is depleted. Everyone knows it. Recruitment's down, retention's down, the equipment's obsolete or overstretched. In any serious conflict, conscription would be unavoidable. That's not even controversial, it is just simple arithmetic. But here's the problem that nobody in the government wants to say out loud. Large numbers currently in the UK, foreign nationals are exempt from conscription. They're not legally obliged to fight for this country. And then at the same time, there's huge numbers of British citizens, particularly younger men, who would refuse to fight. They've said in poll after poll that even if conscripted, that they would refuse and rather go to jail. Some say that there is absolutely no circumstance under which they would defend the UK with arms. And so you go ask yourself, who exactly is left to fight? If we attempted to mobilise today, we wouldn't just be drafting men, we'd be removing the remaining cohesive invested population from this country. All those fathers, sons and brothers, men with families, homes and jobs, the very people who still feel tied to this land. And who would we leave behind? Well, we'd leave millions behind that are exempt, millions that feel no obligation to defend the homeland, and millions whose primary loyalty is not to Britain at all, but to an ideology, identity and faith that transcends national borders and is certainly not rooted in the UK. That's not a moral accusation, it is a strategic reality. And no serious military planner would send the bulk of the loyal male population abroad while leaving the homeland demographically fragmented, politically polarised and socially fragile. That is how countries fall without a shot being fired. And here's the part that nobody really wants to even think about. Russia already knows this. Russia does not need to defeat Britain on the battlefield. It only needs to understand our internal weaknesses, the lack of unity, the lack of willingness to fight, the fact that conscription would spark mass refusal, civil chaos. And so that this is why the talk of Britain marching into a major land war is, primarily theatre. Deterrence is as much about capability as credibility. And right now, our credibility is paper thin. Because a war isn't just fought abroad. Soldiers are taught to sort their admin out before they deploy, as in make sure that home is safe so you can focus on the job at hand. And that's not being done right now. So what do we do? Well, in both world wars, when the state felt truly threatened, it didn't hesitate to intern foreign nationals deemed to be a security risk, not because they committed crimes, but because in wartime, uncertainty itself becomes a threat. Today, that option would barely exist. Legal frameworks, human rights law, political paralysis, it all would constrain the state. And while surveillance replaces certainty, it can't actually prevent, people from running amok while the rest of everyone's like at war overseas. Because all they do is monitor, and monitoring replaces action, and that only works in peacetime. Let me give you a scenario. British men, are sent abroad to fight in a foreign war. The country is hollowed out of, those most likely to resist disorder. Police are overstretched. The army is overseas. And internally, tensions are rising, not necessarily through open rebellion, but through non-cooperation, unrest, intimidation, parallel loyalties. Who have we gone off to have this war with? What's their religion? All this pressure builds up. And you don't need tanks for a takeover. You need demographics, time, and absence of anyone that can put up a defence. And this is a danger that no one in Westminster wants to acknowledge. The enemy within doesn't need to defeat the state, only to outlast it. And, that doesn't mean that everybody would be left behind as an enemy, of course not. But it means the risk environment becomes uncontrollable. The social contract fractures. Our families are left exposed. Communities are left undefended. And the state, loses its monopoly over violence and order. So when people casually talk about war, when politicians posture, when pundits beat their chests, remember this. A country that cannot trust its own population to defend it cannot wage war overseas safely. And any leadership that sent British men abroad under these conditions would be gambling not just with the lives of, them that have gone overseas, but with the existence of the nation itself. And this is why the real danger is not invasion from without, but collapse from within. And this is why, whether people like it or not, the first duty of any state today should be internal cohesion, loyalty, and resilience. Not any foreign adventures, because if Britain were foolish enough to ever fight a major war, it wouldn't be Russia that finished us, it would be the vacuum that was left behind. All of these enemies from within are chomping at the bit to seize.